We left the face-off between Frederick the Great and Emperor Joseph over Bavaria when both sides withdrew from Bohemia, with their tails stuck behind their legs from a battle that did not happen. A peace followed, where Austria made marginal gains by acquiring the Innviertel from Bavaria. The war had ended, and so you probably think the story of Habsburg attempts to take over Bavaria ends here too. You are so wrong. In the following years, Austria kept its eyes on Karl Theodor's possessions in Bavaria, and in 1783 an opportunity arose when Frederick conveniently fell ill. Joseph acted immediately and reissued his offer to Karl Theodor to make him king of a new Burgundy in return for Bavaria. Financially, the exchange would be a net gain for the House of Wittelsbach. While Bavaria covered an area of 800 square miles, the Netherlands had only 600, but they housed a population of 1.8 millions, in contrast to 1.2 millions in Bavaria. Estimates on the potential income of both provinces vary widely, but land at somewhere like 4 million a year for Bavaria and 7.6 million for the Netherlands. From the Austrian perspective, this was a large deficit. To remedy this, they intended to do what they attempted to do before: offer territories they did not own as compensation for their own gains. In comparison to the earlier deal, Joseph altered this offer considerably. Luxembourg and Namur would now not go to the Wittelsbacher, but be used in an exchange with the Bishop of Salzburg and Berchtesgaden. In order to not let the Bishop of Salzburg be without the dioceses, he would switch his bishopric to Liège. This change was in favor of the Austrians, who would finalize their attempt to create a compact power base in the south of the Holy Roman Empire. For Karl Theodor, this deal would not be as attractive as the original one. The Austrian ambassador, supported by Russian diplomats, approached Karl Theodor, and although the offer was not as good as it had been earlier, soon returned with the elector's consent in principle. He was especially enthusiastic about the humiliation of the ecclesiastic princes in Berchtesgaden and Salzburg, whom he detested, although he would rather have liked to have the bishopric for himself. The rest would be haggling about additional payments. Karl August, who had been the tougher one of the Wittelsbacher some years before, consented in principle too. A personal tragedy made this decision easier. His only son, 8 years old, had just died and had left him without an heir of his own blood. So why should he not sell off his possessions? However, he had some second thoughts and demanded that France and Prussia should be informed before the fact. Suddenly France threw a wrench into the machine of diplomacy. France had had a close relationship to Zweibrücken for a long time, even going so far to pay subsidies to its regent. They did not want to lose the influence on the future regent of Bavaria and the Palatinate, and declared itself willing to take over Karl August's considerable debts if he rejected the Austrian proposal. Unofficially, everyone knew that France tried to extort some gains for itself. Indeed, the Habsburgs indicated to the French that the trade would include some goodies for them. Parts of the Austrian Netherlands, that is Luxembourg and Namur, would be given to the Bourbon king Louis XVI. This also meant that Austria gaining Salzburg and Berchtesgaden now was off the table, since the French feared this would improve the Austrian position too much. The French thought this offer acceptable, and cheerfully a message went to Vienna, resulting in a written proposal coming back to Paris, where Louis had to find that nothing of Luxembourg and Namur was in it. Although Joseph made further assurances, the bait now had a bitter taste for the French. The Bourbon king and his diplomatic corps suddenly had second thoughts. They began to reason what an Austrian empire with a coherent landmass would mean. The prospect was terrifying. There was a real danger that this was only the beginning, and other regions may share the fate of Bavaria. A united Germany was the last thing France needed. Soon 2 messages reached Vienna. One came from Louis, stating that France could not approve of such an exchange without consulting Prussia first. While this was bad news for Joseph, the final answer by Karl August was devastating. He demanded not to be contacted again in regards to this issue, and declared that he never had given any sign of interest in this trade. He even went so far as to ask Frederick for help. That the French had had a hand in this was clear. The Netherlands had to remain an easily accessible point of leverage against Austria. They tried not to insult their ally, used stalling techniques, and had others say no for them instead. To be fair to Karl August, there were good reasons not to accept the exchange. Bavaria was the worst managed territory in Germany, which meant that the revenue gathered there could be increased drastically. In contrast, the Austrian Netherlands were rich, but also an important battlefield in every war. Furthermore, there was always the threat of a Prussian intervention in Jülich and Berg if this exchange went through. Thereby, the matter was through. Joseph could not believe that this opportunity had slipped through his fingers. Karl Theodor was very disappointed and grew very angry towards his nephew in Zweibrücken. In addition, there still was Frederick, eager to finish off the issue once and for all, as well as a horde of alarmed princes fearing for their independence. The other princes and rulers in the Holy Roman Empire were most concerned about the developments. The princes had just seen how the major powers had rendered one of the biggest territories in the empire into a plaything. Especially alerted were the ecclesiastic princes, like the Archbishop Elector of Mainz, who had observed the Austrian eagerness to get the bishopric of Salzburg under their control and feared for his own status. Frederick knew how to seize an opportunity when he saw one. As Elector of Brandenburg, he contacted the English King George III, who also happened to be Elector of Hanover, as well as his Saxon neighbor, the Elector Frederick Augustus I. Together, they agreed on an alliance, the Fürstenbund, alliance of the three electors, a power bloc in northern Germany with the purpose of upholding the imperial constitution. For the princes, this alliance was an insurance against Austrian ambitions. For Prussia, the most important power in this system, it was a new ally after it had lost Russia to Austria and thereby had to face a French-Austrian-Russian alliance. The association with George III also meant a not too open alignment with England, who feared that the Netherlands might fall into French hands. In the blink of an eye, the German states had aligned against Austria. Joseph's dream had turned into a nightmare. The interesting thing about the War of the Bavarian Succession is not the fighting, which hardly took place anyway, but the diplomacy surrounding it. Joseph II seized an opportunity to turn the inner German Austro-Prussian rivalry into Austria's favor. It was a big chance and it ended in a big fail. The position of France can be summarized in the words of Blanning. On every occasion that Austria had made a forward move, the French had tried to apply the brakes. In 1772 they had protested noisily if ineffectually about the first partition of Poland. In 1778 they had refused to give any help in the War of the Bavarian Succession. In 1784 they had even threatened to fight against Austria and on the side of the Dutch in the dispute over the Scheldt. In 1785 they had vetoed Joseph II's plan to exchange the Belgian provinces for Bavaria. In the same year they had done nothing to prevent the formation of Frederick the Great's League of Princes. With an ally like that, Austria had no need of enemies. I do not present this quote to put blame on France. I think every power, including Austria, would have had the same motives and would have done the same. In the end, it came down to Austria's own weaknesses. In his youth, Frederick had outplayed Austria at war while turning everyone against him. Now, he did not gain any favorable results in war, but managed to outplay the Austrians in diplomacy and binding the German princes to Prussia. It seems like he was unable to lose even in defeat. As anticlimactic the War of the Bavarian Succession was, as thrilling were the negotiations surrounding it. From them, we can deduce why Prussia would defeat Austria and conquer Germany 200 years later. Our analysis began with the start of this miniseries, the partition of Poland, which triggered the Austrian quest for expansion in Germany. It looks like Prussia got the least part of Poland, but keep the geographical context in mind. By connecting Brandenburg, Pomerania and Prussia, Frederick the Great's position improved greatly. The utility of a corridor to Königsberg is self-evident. However, the integration was not finished at the time of Frederick's death, although emigration of Germans into this area was encouraged. The pushback of the traditional institutions and culture against Germanization was too strong. While Prussia improved its geographical position by creating a compact and connected power base, the Austrian position was much tougher. Of course, it added a nice portion of territory, but the problem was that Galicia was outside of the traditional Austrian power base. The Habsburg Empire controlled the Pannonian Basin and its lifeline the Danube. The Carpathian Mountains were the natural borders in the northeast. Galicia lied beyond that. This was not exactly an improvement. Furthermore, even a successful Germanization of Galicia would only have created a German-speaking enclave like the Bukowina. In areas between, that is Bohemia, Moravia and Hungary, German was not the dominant language. Bavaria, maybe even including the ecclesiastic lands of Salzburg and Passau, would have been a much bigger prize. It could round up the Austrian territories and was connected via the Danube. This gave her an enormous strategic value. The assimilation of Bavaria would have been much easier for cultural and language reasons. Proof for this is the Innviertel, which ended up in Habsburg hands and today has hardly any recollection of ever being Bavarian. However, as we have learned, Joseph failed in his attempts to gain Bavaria. He might have gained the Innviertel, but at the same time created a situation where Frederick could pose as the protector of Germany. This led to a situation where Joseph had less backing in his own Holy Roman Empire than the Prussian king. So, although Austria was the only one making territorial gains during the whole issue, this victory was worthless in the long run. Even in the future, with big events like the Wars of the Coalitions, Austria made only relatively worthless gains, and those outside of its natural border, thereby creating a lot of issues regarding integration. On the other hand, Prussia managed to extend its power base inside Germany. It is no wonder why the Hohenzollern managed to drive the Habsburgs from the traditional position, and today's Germany is a country built by Prussia. At the end, it should be mentioned that all the negotiations with the supposed heirs to Bavaria were in vain. Karl Theodor, who inherited masses of land from childless relatives, also died childless. At least, he had no illegitimate children, although there were a lot of bastards. The same thing happened to his heir, Karl August, Duke of Zweibrücken. His heir was Maximilian III, Joseph, the Duke of Zweibrücken. He would reform Bavaria, secure its standing and ally himself with Napoleon. Today, a good Bavarian sees Prussia with mistrust. However, without Prussia, Bavaria would have ceased to exist approximately 250 years ago. With the integration of Bavaria into Austria and the creation of a new Burgundy in the west, history might have developed in a very different way. What could today's Europe look like? Please describe your scenarios in the comments. For more content like this, do not forget to subscribe. If you want to applaud Frederick the Great's diplomatic competence, push the like button. We'll meet again soon. Stay critical, stay curious, stay free.